exchange that takes place already. School districts and schools are always comparing themselves to other schools and other school districts. How reliable that data is a question, and how well they understand what really is behind some of those numbers that are used is a question. So I'm beginning to see, certainly in this country, here in the United States, more and more educators turning to the benchmarking process as a means of getting behind some of those comparisons so they can better understand why some schools and some school districts operate more effectively. Some examples that come to my mind readily would be the University of Minnesota, who is a total quality environment and practices benchmarking. The University of Oregon, which is probably out in front of many others, but MIT, Harvard, on the primary level or secondary school level, the Sacramento School District here in San Diego, school district in Gilbert, Arizona. There are a number of places where it's happening. Now, beyond that, there's nothing to prevent educators or an educational institution to benchmark with other organizations in the public sector, governments, public operations of various kinds, and with private organizations. There are a number of things that organizations do commonly, whether they're universities, oil companies, or copier companies. And so I wouldn't hesitate to just go out and contact organizations in the public sector who are doing, and private sector who are doing benchmarking. You don't have to stay within the university setting alone, but there are partners who are available in that field as well.
We have now another question coming from, again, Mexico, Chiapas, from the Technological Institute. The question is, how can you know the degree of certainty of the partner or the competitor? How do we know that they're telling the truth?
That's a good question also. I think you sort of stymied me with that a little bit. Come back to the issues of our ethics. I think you'll have two things going for you. First of all, if you have looked at your own work process, and if you have flowcharted it, then you will know, first of all, exactly what you're talking about. Much of the data that you may gather in face-to-face meetings or data that you will gather from the public domain is verifiable from a variety of sources. If you ever learn that an organization has purposely provided you false information, and without citing examples, that has happened, and as some other things have happened in these exchanges, the ethical standards that those of us who practice benchmarking observe require that we disengage from such organizations and we don't create such relationships again. You're hitting at the heart of whether benchmarking can be successful or not, and that is our ability to trust one another. And when in fact we can't trust one another, then the process will not succeed. Frankly, there have been such examples, but they're very, very few, and they're very, very far between. And most of us, I think, have a higher opinions of ourselves and our organizations than to do stuff like that.
This question is coming from Guanajuato, Mexico, from another university. Good morning. We are here at our university And we are together with several people from the city and the students and professors, and we're following step by step all of your interesting presentation and of the series of SDSU, and this is the reason why later we will be able to analyze and discuss some of the things we've heard. Now we are interested in the following. What would you recommend us to overcome obstacles presented by people who are afraid of giving information?
I understand the question, but I'm not certain whether you were talking about within your organization or without. It's sort of like learning to swim. You're just going to have to jump in the water and get started. The kinds of things that I think Armando in his introduction made the point that this was sort of an experiential process, a learning process. And it is only by really beginning to benchmark that you begin to overcome that reluctance, that concern about what am I going to give away? Am I going to lose something? I think, again, the key is to turn to the case examples of people who have applied this process with a great deal of success. Certainly my own organization, Xerox, Federal Express, Motorola, Toyota, General Motors, Procter & Gamble, the list of organizations who have successfully been able to exchange information with other organizations and learn from it and to capitalize on what they've learned and have therefore overcome any reluctance they had is an increasing list. But the only way you can do it is to get started. And again, if you initially get together with a group of organizations who are not competitive, can gain no advantage on one another, and just simply begin that as a free and open exchange, and recognize that your organizations are already doing some of that. As an example, your human resource organizations exchange information on compensation, or they get information from compensation studies. That is a form of benchmarking that has been going on for a long while. So there are examples, and my best advice is just, jump into the water and start swimming.
Thank you. And now we are going to listen to Mr. Finnigan's second part of his presentation.
Let's change direction a little here and consider some of the changes that are impacting our organizations and ourselves as managers. Specifically, I want to share with you how benchmarking fits in with total quality management, organization performance management, building a learning organization, and re-engineering. We'll begin with total quality. In my opinion, companies that aspire to world-class status today cannot achieve it without benchmarking because it is the best approach for guiding any continuous improvement process. Benchmarking lets us determine the most important things to improve and the best approaches for doing so. Your business competitors are also focusing on continuous improvement to achieve higher levels of customer satisfaction. Gaining an advantage over these competitors is the mission of benchmarking, and that is why it should be a key element of any total quality strategy. The question is not whether TQM organizations should conduct benchmarking studies, but how they should conduct them. Quality improvement, that is continuous improvement and customer satisfaction, and employee involvement, are usually accepted as the two basic elements of total quality management. To effectively execute TQM, a company has to rally its employees to focus on continuous improvement efforts to achieve higher levels of customer satisfaction. But which continuous improvement efforts? That is where benchmarking comes in. It helps to understand the importance of benchmarking in total quality by focusing on work processes. First, quality is usually defined as meeting the customer's requirements. This definition suggests that there is a customer and a supplier, that functional work processes are a chain of process connections consisting of an input to a process that produces the output. I provide an input to you, you add value, and pass it on to another. In that example, I am the supplier and you are the customer. I strive to meet your requirements. In adding value, you do so as a supplier for another customer. You now strive to meet their requirements. So just as every function has an input, a process, and an output, every function has customers and every function has suppliers. What benchmarking allows a function or an organization to do is to pursue becoming the best, a model customer and a model supplier, by looking at their own processes and their own competitors' processes to determine what must be done to become the model. Again, the emphasis is on process. A model supplier knows what the customer wants and provides the most efficient processes for delivering what they want. A model customer assures that all the internal processes work efficiently and that external suppliers deliver only what is necessary to assure that the outside customer's requirements are met. Managing may have been easier in the past, when companies could fixate themselves on making their numbers. But today, however, managers realize that businesses cannot live by financial measurements alone. Companies have to learn how to manage complex systems and processes that may involve many departments and functions. In the new world of process management, organizations are employing broad-ranging performance indicators, financial and non-financial. Top management must ensure the measurements are done and that they point the way to better business practices. Currently, there is a revolution taking place in performance management. In this regard, there are 4 important shifts in perspective that are crucially important to senior managers. First, the growing recognition that what gets measured is what gets managed. As Dave Kearns used to say, expect what you inspect. Second is the recognition that customer satisfaction is the ultimate measure. Third, the recognition that many non-financial benchmarks can help achieve total quality. Fourth, the recognition that the information revolution enables organizations to store, distribute, and analyze more data about their organizations than ever before, and to do so at relatively low costs. In determining performance measures, we should distinguish 4 important measurement elements. First, measurement focus, determining where value for the customer is created in a work area or process, where value is diminished through high costs, error, rework, or accidents, and where performance diverges from designated standards. Think of it this way. If the customer could see the work processes that produce the product he buys, would he still pay the price we ask? Second, measurement perspective. High-performing organizations use proactive measures which are leading indicators that help anticipate outcomes. They avoid the reactive measures which are lagging indicators, providing perspective only on a completed performance. These organizations measure to prevent rather than to correct. Third, measurement control. Measurements do not control themselves. That's the task of managers and their people. If you don't have formal systems to assure the effectiveness of your measures, you will not be certain of your performance levels. Finally, data collection. After defining performance measures, managers must be able to readily collect the data from which performance is tracked. It is not enough to draft a fancy measurement for a big objective if the data you need to measure the performance cannot be obtained. These elements are important because isolating the drivers of superior performance requires a coherent set of measures that does 2 things. First, reflects the links between different parts of the process or the system. Second, facilitates critical analysis of the overall health of a process or a system. Robert Kaplan and David Norton have conceptualized such a measurement system that combines both financial and operational measures into an integrated system of performance indicators. They call their approach a balanced scorecard. It grows out of an organization's vision of what it must do to get its customers to rate it number one in total value delivered. Their balanced scorecard performance measurement system has at least 4 elements. First, the financial perspective, which asks, if we succeed, how will we look to our shareholders? This perspective has 3 dimensions: profitability, growth, and shareholder value. Second, the customer view, which asks, to achieve our vision, how must we look to our customers? This perspective has 4 dimensions: time, quality, performance and service, and cost of ownership. Third, the internal operating perspective, which asks, to delight our customers, what management processes must we excel at? This perspective includes 3 dimensions: cycle time, quality, and productivity. Fourth, the innovation and learning perspective, which asks, to achieve our vision, how must the organization continuously learn, improve, and create value? This perspective focuses on innovation, continuous learning, and intellectual assets. This fourth perspective recognizes that many organizations today are building learning organizations to gain competitive advantage. The goal of benchmarking is to learn better ways of doing business and to learn more quickly. A willingness to borrow ideas, to get away from the pernicious not invented here syndrome, is the key to accelerated learning. Many organizations today have discovered a unique source of organizational competency: fast learning. The organization that can learn quickly can best manage change. The most enduring form of competitive advantage lies with fast learning organizations. Organizations who move with Darwinian vigor, evolving creatively, migrating with markets and customers. What characterizes such organizations? They train employees quickly and effectively, fostering new learning, shrinking error rates, and accelerating program, product, and service rollouts. They attract fast learning employees, responsive, receptive, and resilient people. They leverage past successes and failures to continuously improve their processes and services. They adapt quickly, and because they listen closely to customers, they innovate rapidly. They are time responsive. Invariably, they concentrate on reducing cycle times and simplifying processes. Business keeps some companies from being fast learners because size and hierarchy tend to favor control over speed. In contrast, small companies tend to import good ideas from elsewhere. Why? Because they almost always lack the staff and the capital to develop complex systems in-house. To survive, small companies have to be fast, flexible, decisive, opportunistic, and quick to borrow. Can anything drive large organizations to rediscover their creative adaptation? Certainly. Fierce competition and market pressures, to name a few. Examples are Motorola, Milliken, GE, and Xerox. All companies which recognize that borrowing from the best is not only the key to learning, but a guerrilla tactic for survival. At GE, Jack Welch ordered the spread of best practices throughout the company and said, "Best practices has legitimized plagiarism." It would be fair to ask if there are any studies that clarify and validate the learning which takes place with benchmarking. The answer is yes. For one, the Harvard Business School conducted a study and identified 4 forms of organizational learning: vicarious learning, simulation, prototyping, and online learning. Each form of learning is important, but the Harvard study shows that vicarious learning is less expensive than other forms because it is faster than the other approaches. Also, vicarious learning exposes the organization to outside ideas and experience. In other words, it can free us from the prison of our own paradigms. Some simple principles lie at the heart of this. In most cases, incremental progress, slow change, generally comes from within, but rapid progress, revolutionary change, generally comes from without. That's why organizations which harness fast learning find it to be a source of great power and resource. Overall, the basic skills of benchmarking for best practices are the skills of learning organizations, of organizations committed to learning from others. Benchmarking has a proven track record in improving an organization's processes, but benchmarking has made few inroads into higher level planning, and that's unfortunate, because without some external reference points, the hallmarks of benchmarking and organization strategic planning amounts to no more than flying blind. Only a foolish aviator would fail to validate visual sighting by using instruments in the traffic controller. History has recorded some notable crashes by fine companies that thought they were flying the friendly skies, only to find themselves shot down by the competition. How can strategic benchmarking strengthen the organizational performance management process? It can do three things: determine our organization's standing in relation to the best performers, reassure us about the viability of our short-term and long-term goals, and ensure that our business capabilities are adequate. Overall, benchmarking can be a critical tool that tells us if our plan makes sense as we go out to compete. Benchmarking obviously can benefit our businesses, but some people may wonder how it works with re-engineering. In fact, the two approaches go hand in hand. If we sort through the rhetoric of modern management practice, we find there are four basic approaches designed to produce better performance: continuous improvement, management reform, organization restructuring, and process re-engineering. Benchmarking supports all these forms of performance improvement. The four approaches differ in the degree of change they represent, tactical or strategic, and the pace and the longevity of that change, immediate or extended. Tactical change represents small-scale improvements. For example, a process enhancement that reduces defect rates. Strategic change embraces improvements on a much larger scale. For example, reducing new product development time by 50%. Immediate change occurs quickly, usually within 1 or 3 months. Extended change unfolds over many months or even years. Re-engineering projects, for instance, may require 2 or 3 years to implement fully. The two dimensions of change yield four possibilities for performance improvement. First, immediate tactical change or continuous improvement. Benchmarking frequently triggers insights that produce continuing gains. For example, benchmarking uncovered one service company that learned that a few pieces of poorly addressed envelopes were slowing down its mail distribution system. They had fixed the problem by separating and delivering clearly addressed mail first, leaving the poorly addressed pieces for later handling. Incidentally, this solution was provided by an employee who drove to work on a toll road and used that experience to get the mailroom to install its own version of an exact change lane. The second form of change is immediate strategic or organizational restructuring. This involves matters such as functional transfers, structural reorganizations, downsizing, and realignments. As an example of immediate strategic change, one organization had 10 operating companies plus headquarters, each providing management education. To help cut its education costs, the organization benchmarked other companies' practices. Eventually, the company shut down 6 of its training groups and expanded the functions of the other 5 groups. In so doing, it cut costs, eliminated redundancies, and maintained functional expertise. The third form of change is extended tactical, or managed reform. This category embraces a wide array of both reactive and proactive management actions. They are designed to remove errors or problems, to reverse negative trends or to ensure that operating capabilities meet management objectives. Benchmarking can offer the most effective way to help an organization reconceive and redesign its core processes. The final form of change is extended strategic, or business process reengineering. This is a relatively recent approach to performance improvement because it seeks to reinvent the way the company does business. It can take years to put into place fully. The essence of reengineering is that it starts with a clean slate, but it has a passion for dramatic change. For that reason, reengineering promises spectacular performance improvements of 30% to 90%. According to Bogan and English, reengineering involves a 7-step improvement process. Step 1, identify from a customer's perspective the value-added strategic process. Step 2, map and measure the existing process to develop opportunities for improvements. Step 3, pick the low-hanging fruit first, that is, make the improvements that provide immediate benefits. Step 4, benchmark for best practices to develop alternatives to the existing system. Step 5, adapt appropriate breakthrough approaches. Step 6, pilot and test the recommended process redesigned. And Step 7, implement the reengineering process and continuously improve it. In recent years, many companies have engaged in reengineering efforts. Their experiences have relevance both for reengineering and for benchmarking. Here are 5 lessons learned from these organizations. First, to trigger fresh insights, study the best practices of organizations outside your industry. Second, because personnel factors are so critical, study the most effective workforce competencies that underlie an organization's best operating practices. Third, to avoid embarrassing duplications of effort, coordinate interviews and site visits among all teams, contacting external benchmarking partners, including suppliers. Fourth, coordinate benchmarking contact with customers through your sales management staff. Finally, before launching a reengineering effort, be able to answer yes to 2 pivotal questions. Is the process strategically important? And does the process currently fail to deliver competitive performance? In generating improvements, organizations not only must have knowledge of best practices, but also must share that knowledge with their employees. Doing so requires both hardware and software solutions. Hardware, or physical systems, include the full range of communication vehicles, among them databases, electronic mail, videos, newsletters, articles, memos, bulletin boards, reports on competitors. They use modern instructional technology such as video conferencing and PC networks to facilitate these activities. Many companies committed to benchmarking rely heavily on databases or email or both. Databases provide ready access to the best practice information a company has gathered, and email allows rapid contact with internal experts, sources for best practices. Both systems, however, have pros and cons. Databases, for example, allow fast retrieval of information, but they must be updated frequently at significant expense to be effective. As for email, it's a simple, fast method of contacting people, but not all employees actively use these systems. Moreover, unlike databases, email does not have a centralized location for storing information. Clearly, the communication systems we use will depend both on our resources, special needs, and cultures. But whatever system we use will avail us nothing if we lack the enabling software. That is, the management systems and attitudes which develop a culture that encourages sharing information about best practices. Without the software, the knowledge we gain from benchmarking will be like a library where no one ever takes out the book. How can we develop the soft systems that support a best practices culture? By focusing on education and development, on communications, and on rewards and recognition. Education and training can be powerful tools. Some of this education can deal directly with benchmarking, best practices exchange, and the use of databases that facilitate information sharing. In addition, we can encourage vicarious learning by bringing into our organization outside speakers, ideas, tools, and practices. In terms of communications, some of the best organizations in the world have come up with innovative, yet easily adaptable approaches. Companies as diverse as Xerox and Federal Express